And Ricky, thank you so much. It's great work out there. I really have been looking forward to this introduction. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, David Lee, again, Vice President of Innovation in the Strategic Enterprise Fund at UPS. In his role at UPS, David works to accelerate and enable innovation across the company's global network of services and operations by connecting bright people with interesting problems. That sounds like a pretty cool job. Prior to UPS, he helped build a number of teams and capabilities inside other large companies, including SunTrust Bank, based in Atlanta. And before that, he was a member of Bank of America's Emerging Technology Lab and Venture Capital Group. And while there, he worked on exploring and enabling some of the best innovations in personal finance during the past 20 years. David's talk at TED at UPS, titled "Why the Jobs of the Future Won't Feel Like Work," was curated as one of the most popular TED Talks of 2017. And in this presentation, he speaks about the need to rethink how we approach work and the importance of designing jobs to unlock our hidden talents and passions and keep us relevant in the age of robotics. David's perspective is timely and relevant given what our members have shared about finding and cultivating talent as we seek to address the region's economic challenges with economic solutions. Please join me in a warm welcome, David Lee.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Awesome, thank you. Hi, good afternoon. Hope everybody's enjoying their lunch, and I appreciate you spending just a few minutes with me today. I think I'm going to do this microphone instead. So frankly, it's quite exciting to talk to an audience like this of community leaders, both business leaders and civic leaders. I've done kind of a lot of external, extracurricular work around community development, and I find that both in corporate environments as well as in community environments, it's when you get people that have different areas of expertise and strength that come together, things that we can work on, that's when real change happens. That's when you start to see little ideas and inklings turn into small programs, which start to turn into large programs, which turn into impact. And so I'm really excited to get the chance to talk to such a large audience of community leaders. So thank you for your time today. So as Jim mentioned, I was fortunate enough to give a talk at TED last year, and the response has been really amazing, right? It surpassed my expectations. I've flown kind of all around the world. I have like 50,000 frequent flyer miles already this year talking to different audiences. And but in a room full of overachievers like this, I think it's worth pointing out that I'm in some ways still kind of a disappointment to my parents. Because I have a younger brother who gave a really foundational TED Talk in 2008. And it's chock full of really brilliant ideas. I went back and watched it as I was preparing my own talk. And in 6 minutes, he just every 30 seconds, he gives us something brilliant. And I really encourage you guys to, if you have a few minutes, to watch Johnny Chung Lee's talk on TED. But if you do watch it, I'll encourage you, please, to watch mine a few more times, because he has about 4 million more views than I do. So, as Jim mentioned, in my day job, I am the head of innovation and strategic venture capital for UPS, right? And I'm excited that the theme of today is about pivot, right? You don't think of a large institution like UPS. You know, we operate something like 130,000 vehicles around the world. We deliver on the magnitude of 16 million packages every single day. At peak holiday season last year, the company picked up and dropped off 47 million parcels in a single day, right? So I'm hopeful that we played a positive role in your own holiday season, or even in the last week of your life. But we sit in an interesting position because revenues are higher than they've ever been, profits are higher than they've ever been, global reach is higher than it's ever been. Our international growth is now 50% of our total volume, and those are the fastest growing, highest margin regions that we have in our entire global portfolio. But we're under attack, right? We're seeing entrants come from every single segment of the marketplace. Everyone views last mile as part of their own customer experience. You know, we're seeing startup companies like Uber and Postmates and the sort come into this business. And what's kind of terrifying to us, right, speaking of the word pivot, is that there's this asset-light model that occurs, right? Of course, you guys have heard the stats around Uber not owning any cars and being the largest taxi company, and Airbnb not owning any property and still being the largest hotel operator in the world. But the question is, what will happen to places like UPS when those models start to come into our business, right? And our fear, frankly, is that people will be able to replicate networks that took us several hundred billions of dollars to build and 112 years to create. So we, into ourselves, have to figure out how to reinvent ourselves to make sure that we remain relevant for the next 20 to 40 years. So one of the things that I'm working on is about how do we reinvent the culture inside of UPS, right? How do we approach problems? How do we view the market opportunities? How do we start new businesses, and how do we start new departments? I think when you're leading large organizations, the question is about talent, right? How do you build people who can offer the services and design and create the products that you need to have? But where do they come from, right? You can hire them from schools, you can bring them from the outside, you can hire them as contractors. And UPS has historically built its entire talent base around people who started in operating centers like this, right? I don't know this guy, but it wouldn't be uncommon at all for him to have started working for UPS part-time for a few years, and as he graduated, he'd take on a full-time supervisory position and then move to senior positions. And what has happened is that people who have dedicated their lives to serving our customers and running the operation of UPS now run the company, right? Our CEO started his life as a package handler and a driver in Mississippi in 1968, right? And that's not at all uncommon. But the interesting thing is, we as a firm are very good at competing against our legacy competitors, right? If you ask an executive at UPS, how do we have to fight against FedEx? How do we have to fight against Postal Service and DHL and the sort? We've got those answers. But what we don't have very good answers for, and frankly, part of my job is to help to figure out how do we build competitive products when we're talking about competing with Uber or Facebook or even Amazon. And I promise you, when you have to think about your very largest customer as your potential largest competitor, not all stakeholders will see that the same, right? And we have to figure out how to pivot our organization and how to grow given these changes that are in front of us. One of the other large things that's happening to our business is that, we've been in some ways the beneficiary of e-commerce, right? We're proud of the fact that we deliver, X million packages for Amazon and all of the other e-commerce companies every single day, right? But we actually have a lot of control over what comes through that network. And we ourselves are struggling with the fact that people are ordering more bigger things. Like, it was unusual 5 years ago for people to order a mattress or a sofa or like I did earlier this week, a bookshelf. But that has to go through our network, and we, as a large global institution, have to figure out how to deal with the fact that the world is changing around us. And we can't just yell at the wind. We can't say, please stop ordering sofas through the internet, because that's what the market demands, and that's what the customers are saying, and so we need to respond to those things pretty well. So one of the things that we're doing is building programs to help train UPSers to be better at the new relevant skills that matter, right? There's a couple of ideas that we've been borrowing from Silicon Valley that we think are really important, that enable people to move faster and approach problems in a new, fresh, responsive way. So of course you guys have probably heard of Agile, right? Agile software development is a way where you bring small teams together, work in little 2-week chunks, and we found that to be incredibly effective. We're also thinking about how do we go from, I have an idea of something that I build and I want to see if there's commercial truth to that. And so can I go from concept to functioning prototype inside of 6 to 8 weeks? And then how do we test that in a really controlled market? But the thing that I'm spending a lot of my time on these days is machine learning. Just by a quick show of hands, who in the room has heard of machine learning? All right, about a half, I guess. And raise your hand, your other hand, if you feel like you could explain machine learning to your next door neighbor. So a little bit of a smaller, maybe 10 to 15%. So if I can offer you one thing, it's this thing. And it's that in all of our research, in all of the companies and all of the tech startups that we work with, there is absolutely nothing in the world that is changing the world faster than machine learning. So it's very, very important that every business leader, if you run a company, or if you run a team, if you run an organization, I implore you to think about learn more about machine learning, and then think about how it can be deployed in your company. So I'm going to give a little bit of a tutorial about how it works in case you do need to explain it to your next door neighbor tomorrow. So the modern age of, so I think people have been thinking that artificial intelligence is going to change the world for 50 years, right? And the truth is that it hasn't yet. And the question is why? And there's a bunch of reasons why, but at the end of the day, the real reasons why are that the computational power just wasn't strong enough for many, many years, right? The processors that we needed didn't exist, the software didn't exist. But in 2012, there was a groundbreaking study at Google, Google X Research, led by a guy named Andrew Ng and another guy named Jeff Dean. And they don't give out Nobel Prizes for computer science, but if they did, I promise you the 2008 study for cats would have done it. And so what they tried to do, and it sounds silly, right? And it actually, frankly, is kind of silly. What they tried to do is they tried to figure out is, could we teach a computer how to recognize a picture of a cat and not a cat, right? And what they did is they built this cluster of 1,000 computers at the time, and they just showed it tens, thousands, hundreds of pictures of cats, and said, these are cats. And then it showed them 20,000 pictures of not cats. And then that's how the machine learned, like a toddler would learn, right? So if you show a human being, a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old, 20 pictures of cats and then 20 pictures of not cats, and you say, hey, is this a cat or not? A 1-year-old is probably going to be able to figure that out over about a week, right? But in this situation, you're able to feed a system 20,000 pictures over the course of about 4 or 5 hours, and now you've taught the computer to understand what is a picture of a cat and what's not a cat. Like traditionally, what would have happened before this study, you would have tried to build an algorithm that says, all right, computer, when you see a picture like this, look for cute pointy ears, an adorable little fuzzy nose, some paws, and that's what a cat looks like. But the problem with trying to train a computer by writing thousands of lines of code is that you simply can't deal with all the variables. The different colors of cats, the environment that the cat's in, it could be hiding under a desk, it could be sitting on top of a dog or a couch. But what they were able to do is successfully teach teach a software how to recognize pictures of cats and not cats. And to sort of reinforce how this affects your everyday life, if you upload any pictures to Apple or Google or Microsoft today, there's AI in the background looking at all your photographs and providing tags of that sort of thing. So I invite you to go to like Google Photos or your equivalent or Microsoft and type in any random word, right? I like to type in the word donuts because I take a lot of pictures of food that I eat. And without labeling anything or any human being labeling anything, there's artificial intelligence software looking through every single photograph, every single post, and identifying what that thing is, right? So identifying what's a picture of a donut versus what's a picture of a cat probably doesn't seem that relevant to you, right, as leading large businesses with real P&Ls. So I'd like to give you, actually I want to go back. Can I go back one? I'd like to give you 2 quick examples of stories that I think help illustrate the changes that will be coming over the next 5 years because of machine learning. So what this is it's a sneak peek of a laboratory called the ARM Farm. And about 5 years ago, Google decided to get out of the process of programming robots and instead started training them all through machine learning. And what they've done is they basically created a whole array of little arms, the pincers with a camera on it and an environmental camera that points in from the side, sorry. And they just presented it with a random tray of objects. And for the first several months, it would fail at picking things up, right? But every day it got a little bit better because you had another camera looking at whether it picked it up or it smashed it or dropped it. And then it got a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. And what they realized is that it was going to take simply forever to get to 500,000 training runs if you were doing one robot at a time. So they set up this array of, I think here it looks like 20-something robots. And each of the robots was training the same brain. And now over the course of the last 2.5 years, you can present any object to it, and it, having never seen it before, will appropriately size up how hard it is, how heavy it might be, and appropriately grab it and pick it up, right? So this technology is entirely machine learned. There was no programming going on. It was just about creating an environment for the machine to learn, and then giving it a lot of time to learn how to do that problem. I don't know if I have a slide on this, but I have another story that I'd like to share that's actually another Google story. And I share kind of a lot of Google stories, in part because Google, I think, has done a very good job at transforming themselves from a search engine company to an artificial intelligence company. Another example that is public from them is that about 2 years ago, they pointed DeepMind, which is their big AI tool, at their data centers. And Google spends a tremendous amount of money on electricity for their data centers. And over the course of 36 hours, the AI was able to reduce the energy usage in a data center by 17%. And then they've deployed them across their entire suite of portfolio, and they're seeing power reductions of up to 40%, right, in a matter of days. And the thing that they point out publicly is that it's important to remember that if you see your energy use go from here to here, right, in one day, that's significant economic value that's been created. But the power control systems that were at Google managing those data centers were not haphazardly written, right? They were written by Stanford and MIT PhDs. These are Google engineers who wrote the best algorithm that they could, and they got smoked in 36 hours by machine learning. Right, so one of the things that I worry when we talk about impact from machine learning and robotics, it's important to know that it's not just blue-collar work, not just simple work that we're talking about. Advanced decision-making is going to be radically impacted by the ability to give complex multivariable problems to these software packages. Okay, so the other thing that's kind of interesting that I think over the last couple years that will impact us as business operators is the application of consumer technology into businesses, right? So if you think about the best things that have been coming out of Silicon Valley over the last 10 years, think about the things you spend time on. You may own one of these great products at home, the Google Home or the Alexa Echo, and spend our time doing. We buy things more efficiently on Amazon. We binge watch videos better on Netflix, right? But overall, one of the things that's happened is that Silicon Valley has been focused on consumer technology and has not been creating technology that makes us as workers more efficient, or us as business operators more efficient. In fact, if you look at the sort of productivity curve for American workers, it's actually leveled off over the last 5 years. And I think largely this is because of the fact that Silicon Valley is focused on building consumer tech and not on industrial tech. But I think that's changing. I think what we're seeing over the next couple of years is that these things that we have built for consumer technologies are going to be coming into our workplace. So I'll imagine for a second, how awesome is Wikipedia? Like, how quickly can you learn how to do something on YouTube? How efficient is it to find information via Alexa or your tablet? But working in 2018 feels a lot like working in 2008, right? The sort of experience as workers has not gotten a lot better in the last 10 years, but I expect that to change, right? So as we take concepts about YouTube, right? I hope that most people in this room have learned something on YouTube, like you need how to replace a part car or fix a gasket on a dishwasher, or how to learn, say a certain word in another language. You can go to Google or Netflix or YouTube and they give you these answers like instantaneously. But finding answers inside of organizations is still really hard, right? So what will be happening is that we'll start to see these pivots of technologies that have been designed for consumer consumer applications, and they're going to start coming very aggressively into the industrial world. But one of the sad truths that I laugh about, right, is that today, right, in May 2018, the amount of computing technology that goes into determining when an ad should be placed in a video of a cat on YouTube is literally 1 trillion times more powerful than the amount of technology that's used to track $50,000 orthopedic surgical parts around the country. Right, I'm working on a project now to sort of give us better visibility on $100,000 medical parts. And among leading brands of incredibly important companies, we're talking about Excel spreadsheets and marker boards that are tracking this technology. It's really quite stunning. So I believe it's coming, but it's also my professional hope is that these technologies are going to be more useful in our workplace in the next couple of years. So one of the big things I think is worth talking about is automation, right? So automation is not new. We've seen it across many different industries. I know there's not a lot of people who work in economic development here, and part of the question is how do we deal with the fact that new technology allows us to produce more with fewer people? Recently, I took a tour of a tire factory in LaGrange, Georgia that was just opened by a company called Century Tire. It's a Chinese company. And I think it's in 1.8 million square feet, they're able to produce something on the magnitude of 20,000 tires a month. Is that right? With 200 people, right? And compared to a traditional tire factory, that's 80% less than a normal tire factory. And we've seen this movement for automation impact the world dramatically over the last 50 years, right? But one of the things that's important to recognize is that automation in physical manufacturing takes a lot of money. Like this robot here probably costs about $150,000, and that's just for the machinery. It has nothing to do with the software and the programming that you have to do, right? But with machine learning and robotics process automation, we're going to start seeing radical changes that come because of the fact that when you try to use technology to replace a factory, it takes several years to design those machines, and it takes several $1 million to build that equipment. But if you have a room full of people who are doing clerical work, like people who are doing loan processing and basic service things, even if they're exercising human intellect and human judgment, the automation of service work happens a lot faster because you can take robotics process automation and some machine learning tools, and over the course of 2 to 3 months, and just tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, instantaneously change how the work of 200 people are done, right? So what I would argue is the thing that we need to be conscious of as leaders is that the shift in application of automation in the service sector, the knowledge worker, is going to happen faster than that would happen in manufacturing. One of the things I think that's also interesting that we should be aware of is that it simply takes fewer people to make stuff than we used to, right? And I don't mean just stuff, I mean products as well, right? The Atlantic magazine had a really fascinating article about 6 months ago that outlined, that was comparing the big three of Detroit from the 1950s to the big three of Silicon Valley in 2016. And what you see here is a comparison of the number of human beings that went to work to those companies in those heydays of time. Right, off to the left, you see nearly 550,000 people went to work at General Motors in 1956. Combined, the big three of Detroit in the 50s employed nearly 1 million people, right? And if you look at the big three of Silicon Valley today, Facebook, Amazon, and Google, combined, they only employ something about 230,000 people. But the profit levels are much higher. So there's structural change that's going on in terms of how much profit, how much revenue can be produced with fewer human beings. And this is not something we can change. Like, we can't yell at the wind. Technology makes us more productive, and it gives us more reach than ever before. One of the things also worth mentioning, though, is that GM is also much smaller now than it is today. If you look at GM today, it's about 40% shorter than that. So even the large industrials who have pivoted and reinvented themselves and divested and changed the way they operate, the number of human beings it takes to produce way more cars is simply a smaller number. So if I may, I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking about kind of 4 personal views that I think will be affecting labor and working over the next, call it 15 years. And the first is the movement of jobs to what everybody gig economy, right? So it might surprise you. So statements by both Ronstadt and Intuit have said that today 36% of American workers participate in the gig economy in one way, shape, or form. Right, 36% of American workers do one of these small jobs, right, on the side. And what they expect is that it'll be approximately 50% of the American workforce participates by 2020. Right, 3 years from now, 50% of American workers will be participating in the gig economy in some ways. So the opportunity that exists for us as business leaders and product designers is to sort of create businesses that are relevant to this world, right? We often talk about B2C, B2G, B2B. But I think there's this evolution of B to gig, right? There are services that will be relevant to people who are working as freelancers and drivers and the sort. And we need to figure out how to create opportunity. We need to address this change that's coming and create products that are relevant to that sector. But I also think it's important to recognize that this growth in gig work is also not immune to change, right? So the number of, I don't know the number of how many people are employed as Uber and Lyft drivers around the United States, but it's in the millions. And the important thing to remember is Uber and Lyft also have 2 of the most advanced self-driving car programs, right? So in many ways, these millions of jobs are also not long for this world. So that's kind of a downer, and I apologize about that. But so the other couple models I'd like to talk about is this concept about human in the loop. Right. So much like we talked about these robots picking things up, and you give them, training examples. One of the things that I think will be very common over the next 10 to 15 years, like starting now to 10 years out from now, is this concept about human in the loop. right? So when you're trying to build an autonomous system, a car that can drive itself on any condition, or a drone that can fly itself in anywhere, or a robot that can handle material in any kind of environment, there's a lot of real experiences that are really hard to program for, and especially as they're infrequent, right? Part of the reason that the CAT study works is because you can give them controlled examples of 20,000 things and tell it whether it's right or wrong. But when you don't know what to expect, right? One of the things that we do as humans really well is assess a situation that we've never seen before, use everything that we've learned in the past, and make an assessment on what we should do in that situation. That's sort of combinatorial judgment. So in the current path of AI, that's not going to come anytime soon, right? AI learns through very specific trained models, and it deals with things that it's seen before well, but doesn't deal with things that it hasn't seen before. So I think one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to see more and more of this human-in-the-loop interaction. What you see here is a company that we've had some conversations with that drives tractor trailers. So they're operating today in Florida, and they don't have any human being in the truck. So they're 18-wheelers moving freight in the state of Florida today with no person in the vehicle. Right? And the way they've solved it is that the technology for highways is actually quite good. Like most autonomous car companies can drive vehicles on a highway because it's a straight road, there's not incoming traffic, there's not often pedestrians walking across the highway. So that's sort of easy when you're not for me, but for people who know how to build self-driving cars. But what's hard is when you get off the road, when there's all these environmental variables and you don't know what's going on. And so the way they've solved this is that they connect the trucks wirelessly using cellular networks and cameras back to drivers in command centers, who then take over the vehicle and drive it in unknown circumstances. So broadly speaking, it's from a distribution center to the highway. A human being is driving it remote control. The AI takes over while it's on the highway, and then once it gets off the highway, a human being takes over again. So today it's a one-to-one model, but in the future, this company aims to have instead of a driver being an actual driver, a driver becomes sort of a manager of a small fleet of vehicles that are in motion at any given time. So I expect this model to be actually a very common one that we get to sort of level 5 autonomy in vehicles, but across applications of robotics across the board. There will be a role for trained, diligent, and important, responsible human beings to teach our robots how to act, right? And in some ways, the model for this sort of remote operation of trucks, or whatever it is, whether it be drones or material handling robots or whatever your creativity might come up with, is that it's actually really friendly to the human being, right? So think about the life of a long-haul driver today. You're gone from your family for months at a time. You have to hit these, mileage things. You can't take breaks. And what this allows you to do, if you're working in an office environment, but just sort of managing a series of trucks, you can take breaks when you need to. You can take sick days when you need to. You can go watch your kids play soccer. You sleep in your own bed every night. There are real advantages to the idea of having human beings control robots from a distance, right? So anyway, I just think human-in-the-loop is an important model that we need to be thinking about. This is the slide for the Google Data Center. So one of the things I think is also interesting is this concept of Agile, right? So we think about Agile, just a quick show of hands, who's familiar with Agile? Right? So not that many. It's something that came out of software development, and the big idea behind Agile is this idea of saying, can we start breaking work away from individuals and start assigning work to teams? And I think one of the things it's worth noting is that I think we're moving to a model where the problems that we're asking human beings to solve at the front of the curve are getting complex enough where it's hard to give a project to one person. You always have to give a project to a group of people. And there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained by allowing groups of teams to be very stable. In my life, and I grew up in large corporate environments where you say, let's accomplish a certain goal. 2 people sort of pitch an idea, then that idea gets funded, you turn into 4 people, that turns into 8 people, that turns into 70 people, and then over the course of a year and a half, you accomplish a really big thing. And that's great, and you learned how to work together, you started to understand nuances of who likes to do what work and who doesn't like to do what work. But the model that we have in a lot of places is that we break those teams up when they're done, and they go home, and they never, you might build a friendship, but those efficiencies that we gain by working together disappear. And one of the future models for work, I think, that we've seen already exhibit itself in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street is that people move as teams, because teams of people as human beings get these little nuances about who has to go home and walk the dog, who likes to stay up late playing video games, who doesn't like to do technical documentation, and who has the patience to do it. And those teams, those highly efficient teams, will start to migrate as groups from one place to another. It's very common practice in Wall Street trading desks now not to hire individuals anymore, but to hire an entire team. And as I understand, one of the sort of founders of Facebook has started a new company. I mean, he started lots of companies, but one of the companies he started is basically a recruiting site that allows people to post for jobs and accept jobs of teams of people as opposed to individuals of people. So the truth of the matter is that I don't really believe in the jobless future, right? I think part of the jobless future really comes from the fact that we haven't been creative enough about what it is that will come later. And if you think about the high growth companies, the ones that are actually excellent at artificial intelligence and technology and product development, the ones that have the capital and courage and appetite to build new businesses are actually the ones hiring the most people. One of the things which shocks me is that, so I joined UPS about 14 months ago. On the day that I joined UPS, Amazon, so we have about 430,000 employees worldwide. Amazon had about 230,000 employees 14 months ago, right? Today, at the end of the year, or actually in the last annual report, Amazon had 530,000 employees. So Amazon has more than doubled in terms of human beings in the last 14 months, right? And what that tells me is that the companies that are building commerce, the companies that have ideas of new businesses that need to be started and markets that they want to pursue, they start by hiring people, right? So the jobless future really, in some ways, is about imagining the status quo, that the economy doesn't grow and that new businesses and industries don't get created. But the truth of the matter is we have a long history of creating new industries and reinventing ourselves. We just don't know what those are, right? And we as leaders, if we give people the chance to build new businesses, I'm actually running a contest this year that we're going to call Upstarts, where I'm going to be inviting literally 10,000 employees of UPS to give us business plans for things, new businesses that we could create, things that we can invest in, things that we can grow, things that we can bring. But the one rule of this contest is that none of these businesses are allowed to have anything to do with moving packages, right? It's these invitations to sort of new industry that I think will lead to new jobs and the future of work. One of the things, as just validation, recently I went to Amazon because we're starting the machine learning team inside of UPS, and I had a certain kind of job and I wanted to know what the world called it. So I went to Apple and Google and Amazon to see what those jobs were called. In case you're wondering, the job is called machine learning engineer because we have a machine learning scientist already. But I looked at just typing in the word machine learning at Amazon jobs, and there were 2,144 job openings at Amazon today for machine learning. And what blows me away is I presented this slide another maybe 2 weeks ago, and I looked up the number then, and the number has gone up 150 in the last 3 weeks, right? So as somebody who's trying to compete against Amazon, it's incredibly depressing that the number of job openings that showed up in the last week well eclipsed the budget that I have to hire machine learning people at UPS for the year. But we'll get there. But there's a human factor as well. I also looked up the word humor, and humor shows up in 200 job listings as well, and it also went up by 5 job listings in the last 3 weeks. So this idea that we're not just looking for scientists, we're not just looking for engineers, we're looking for people who have a sense of empathy, this ability to create experiences that people appreciate and want to be a part of, that's the heart of creating things that matter, right? So everyone runs a business of some type, and I'm going to kind of finish here with this challenge about how I would invite you to think about what we can do with this new technology and how we can change the future of work. One of the problems that I think got us into this situation is that, there have been kind of 3 major transitions in the American economy over the last 150 years. We went from 90% of people working in agriculture to 2% of American workers on farms. We went from 85% of workers working in manufacturing to 8% today, and that number is likely to shrink, right? And now we have, as we moved from these factories to offices and shops and clinics, we didn't really readdress what it is that we asked our human beings to do and how they behaved. Like, we still pay people for the hours that they go to work, and we think about the number of hours that someone is present as compared to the amount of value that they create in that time, right? We've created these narrowly defined job definitions where we ask people to just a little bit of themselves, right? there's the most common jobs in the United States. Let's see, there's 13 million people who work in food service, as checkout clerks, as office professionals, and what's the last one? But the satisfaction levels are incredibly low, right? A 2013 survey from Harvard Business Review asked 12,000 working professionals in the United States, and what is it? Half of the survey respondents agreed with the statement that their work has no meaning and significance. And an equal number said that they're completely unable to relate to their company's mission. Right? An international survey of 230,000 employees 2 years ago across 140 countries showed that only 13% of workers actually like their work. Right? And this is an accident. There's no question. We didn't do this on purpose. Right? But we did this because of the way that we were trained to think, the way that companies operated before we got there. And I think it's important for us to realize that the efficiencies that will come from AI and robotics give us an opportunity to radically read what work can feel like. Right? Oops. Can we go back one? Sorry. So the problem we face this one is one of time, right? So we had 50 years to move from farms to factories, and then another 30 years to move from factories to offices and shops. But if the pace of AI and robotics continues the pace that it's on, we might only be talking about 10 or 15 years before millions of jobs disappear. So this is a chance to take steps to prepare and train our people, to change the environments that we ask them to come to work in, right? And my invitation to you, my challenge to you, is to take this opportunity to create a new era of human-centered jobs. What do we do on weekends that we're really good at? What are the things that you pursue when you're invited to pursue the things on your own? What books do you read for fun? What do you like to talk to your family members about? What kind of TV do you watch on the weekends? Because that indicates what you would do and where you create value and where you chase mastery. And we as leaders need to start to invite people to bring that into work, right? Even in the professional environment, right? We all have business cards. I think what's cool about this room is everybody's business card says CEO. But even as professional workers, there are 2 or 3 words on your business card. And I would challenge you that there is no way that those business cards, those 2 or 3 words, represent all the things that you're capable of doing in 40 to 60 hours a week, right? But yet we ask people to be these very narrow definitions of themselves. So what's clear to me is that the future of work is actually very multidisciplinary, and we're seeing it across all kinds of things. You see it in medical research, you see it in food and popular music, you see it in robotics, where the future of creating new products and services is about bringing different views and different perspectives together to create something that isn't interesting in the old domain and isn't interesting in another domain, but when you bring them together, it's a fusion of all kinds of new possibilities and scientific discovery. And what we need to do is to start to allow those different levels of expertise and different areas of passion within a human being and within a team to start to bring those talents together to unlock new ideas, right? It could be something silly, like we actually give people 20 to 30 different business, job titles. But really what this is about is saying, look, most organizations invite people to be very narrow versions of themselves when they come to work. And if we need to change the future of work, things we need to start doing at a very, very basic thing is we have to stop asking human beings to work like they're robots. Because the work that's best suited for robots will be given to robots. And if we just allow human beings to do nothing, then it leads to societal ill that's just not going to put us in a good place. But if we reframe what it is that we're asking people to be at work, to be more dynamic, to create new things, it gives us the chance as business leaders, the talents and passions that exist inside the people who come to work at our organizations, and to be Amazon, right? To be the company that builds a new business every week, right? That grows their revenue, grows their human capital base, grows their talent, and in the process creates all kinds of new valuable services to the world. So one of my heroes is a professor at the University of Chicago named Harry Davis, and there's a phrase that he told me years ago that has really hung, which is about, if you want to find happiness at work, make sure you can find an environment where you don't have to leave too much of yourself in the trunk of your car, right? And that's the thing. If you are creating organizations, if you're leading organizations, I invite you to think about how much of the workers that come to work at your company every day are leaving what percentage of themselves in the car, right? Because if it's 40%, 50%, 70% of themselves, that's the situation where people hate going to work on Monday. And there are a million jokes about going to Happy Monday, blah, 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 Happy Friday, I get to get out of here, right? But that really is an example of people being thrilled that the human being that they get to be on Friday is not as good as the human being they get to be on Saturday. And so we have an opportunity to think about how do we bring that in? How do we make work more interesting? I ran a whole series of contests at the bank that we used to work at, and it was really simple, right? All we did was we put up these posters all around the company, and we told them that it was okay to be awesome. Like for the weeks that we ran these campaigns, people were free to sort of shed whatever normal job title they had, bring a crazy idea to work, and then share it with 5, 8 other people, and create a new business, create a new product. In our first hackathon, which was an experiment, we just said, hey, anybody who wants to build anything can build anything over the next 3 weeks. It just actually has to work. It can't be a PowerPoint presentation. And lo and behold, 500 people volunteered their spare time for this contest, and we had 50 functioning prototypes 3 weeks later. Right? Had we gone out and said, let's go build 50 functioning prototypes, that would have cost millions of dollars. But what we found was all of these people recognizing problems that they saw on the front line, finding collaborators and saying, this is something that will make our customer experience better. This will make something that will make my employee experience better. Will you help me build this? Right? And giving people the freedom to pursue things that were interesting to them and was very clearly personally motivated by opportunities that they saw to make improvements. They need these windows of opportunity. There was a couple interesting that happened. These contests 4 or 5 times, and each time we had the same thing happen. Thousands of people or hundreds of people would show up, create unbelievably interesting things, and then we took those products to market, right? So that part of it is when people show the brave side of themselves to create something new, we have a responsibility to do something with that, right? But one of the questions that I would get again and again was, why don't people do this all the time, right? You might have put suggestion boxes out in your organization, but that's not it. The truth is to be really innovative, you have to have permission to do that. And you can't ask people to do that all the time, because to be really, you have to show courage. You have to be willing to bring crazy ideas to work. And most management, most organizations, right, don't have the risk appetite to allow people to bring crazy ideas to work every day. And I think it's frankly unrealistic to ask people to sort of exert a certain level of bravery and say, hey, I know our core business is this, but I think we'd make a lot of money if we went to go do this other completely unrelated thing, right? Every manager would say, why are you doing that as opposed to what you're actually paid to do, right? So if you're trying to figure out how to bring more innovation out of your organization, actually narrowing the windows for when people are encouraged and given the freedom to be crazy matters a lot. Ask them to do it all the time, because if you think about any organization, there's a hierarchy to things. And if I have an idea that I'm personally convinced is a great idea, but I take it to my boss who has never thought about it more than 20 minutes that I gave him or her the PowerPoint presentation, there's a 50-50 shot that they think it's a good idea. And so maybe it falls to one side of the 50 or the other, but then they take it to their manager, and that 50-50 shot becomes a 25-75 shot. And then again, it's 87% shot. So once you go up 3 levels, suddenly somebody who is 100% convinced, because they've spent 400 hours working on an idea, looks like something that's only 13% likely to be good. And so good ideas die because there has to be levels of judgment, and each judgment there's going to be a thing that flips back and forth. So part of this contest is also about hotwiring that process and allowing, at the end of these programs, allowing ideas to flow to the very top without forcing anyone in between executive decision makers and frontline kind of creative inventors the chance to sort of pitch that idea. You need to have a third party or a separate uninterested party or a group inside your company that's willing to look at all the ideas with a fresh lens and then escalate them right to the top. And then you can decide. But the sort of the risk-averse nature of management in general makes it very difficult for ideas to move up and down the pole. That's why, frankly, executives don't really get a lot of good ideas. So, all right. So, frankly, I'd just like to close with this sort of reminder that we as leaders need to allow people to organize independently and choose projects that they're personally inspired to solve, right? And this coming wave of AI and robotics isn't really something that we should fear. In fact, it's something that we need to embrace because it's going to lead to tremendous efficiencies and better decision making and better experiences, consistent experiences for our customers and for our employees. But we have a choice to make. We can either just say, hey, suddenly I can lay off 200 people, or what I can do is I can take 200 people who now have 10 more hours a week, who understand the mission and purpose of my company, they understand my customer needs, they understand my markets, they have relationships with people inside the company as well as people who are willing to be paying customers. And how do we actively redesign new kinds of work that are better and more meaningful and more fulfilling the work that we have today? So as we enter this age of intelligent machines and then we find more tasks that will be handed from human beings over to technology, we have a chance to create a new form of work where we can invite humans to act like humans, where they bring all the messy, unexpected, and error-prone behavior, but occasionally brilliant behavior to work. So let's create a future that's not just more efficient, but more humane and centered around human beings, because I really do believe that the future depends on it. Thank you very much.